Thanks for tuning into the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with more NFL news, or better yet, an NFL topic and debate. So, looking at the running backs in NFL history, I started thinking of the two greatest running backs of all time. Now, these running backs are, of course, Barry Sanders and Marshall Faulk. Now, two different running backs in two different systems, of course. Barry Sanders playing in Detroit, but not much infrastructure and enough tools around him. He didn't have a world class quarterback. He didn't have a world class line for sure. He didn't have a great quarterback in front of him. Defense was kind of in between. He was barely able to make the playoffs throughout his career, and it contributed to his career being cut short. He retired at the age of 30, which most people thought he had at least a few more years left in him, especially if he was traded and was rejuvenated. But that's a story for another day. But yet, nevertheless, a great running back whose place in the Russian totals for his career is fourth place. But I think when he retired, he was like number three until ultimately he was surpassed by Frank Gore. So, um, excellent running back. So that's the story on Barry Sanders, of course. Marshall Faulk, on the other hand, was drafted by the Indianapolis Colts and was later traded to the Rams, where he ascended, became an MVP, a Super Bowl champion, all of these great things. One of the first running backs next to Roger Craig to catch 4,000 yards and run 4,000 yards. Very versatile back. One of the few backs that we see of his kind until today, which I'll talk about in a little bit about the influence he had on today's running backs and Roger Craig's impact as well. With those guys like Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Le'Veon Bell, all have to thank Marshall Faulk for what he was able to do, and it helped that genre of running backs, or that category of running backs, ascend to the next level and be more demanded, opposed to just the straight runners or pure rushers. So it had me thinking about which one of these running backs, Marshall Faulk or Barry Sanders, I would rather have. So looking at the if I was a GM or if I was a head coach, which one I would rather have. And there's a simple answer for me, despite the greatness of both these running backs. And the answer simply is Marshall Faulk, because Marshall Faulk is not just a pure rusher. He can pass catch as well. He can line up in the slot as he's done with the greatest show on turf offenses. I believe he did it a little bit with the Colts, and he was just a more versatile back. And, both running backs, I would say, are durable, but Barry Sanders is probably a little bit more durable. But if you have an offense where you have pieces around it, uh, Marshall Faulk, I think, would be better suited for that offense. Barry Sanders, I think, if things were different and somehow he was drafted to the Cowboys, I do believe he would have lasted longer in his career, and he might even have the rushing title opposed to Emmett right now, because Emmett had a way better offensive line than he did. Marshall Faulk, that is not his game predicated just on pure rushing. He had great rushing games of like 200 yards, but they wanted him to be a safety in college, but he ended up, being a running back, which was the greatest move in probably NFL history or college football history. But nevertheless, Marshall Faulk in the league, you can just do so many things with him offensively that you couldn't do with Barry Sanders. I think he could catch screens and stuff like that. Before as going catching passes down the field, being a pass catcher, that was not his forte. And that's the same knock that Derrick Henry has, Adrian Peterson has. Great pure rushers of the football, but they really wasn't three down backs. They would, especially Derrick Henry, he would be taken out in third downs. Wasn't a great catcher of the football except for screens. They run really efficient in route running, which, back in, most offenses, you don't need to be that. But we see this whole new premiere of running backs that have done so much other than just be pure rushers. And we really don't even see them as just pure rushers, like a Jameer Gibbs or a Bijan Robinson. They actually elevate their offense, because now you have to watch this running back running routes, and you can't just put a linebacker on them. Sometimes you have to dedicate a cornerback to him or a nickelback to, for these guys, and it messes up the flow of you trying to guard the receivers. And we know the Lions have some elite receivers with with St. Brown and the other guys that they have at their disposal, even the Tisla guy that's been coming along lately. So it makes their offense even more scary. And then when you have a quarterback like Jared Goff, who might be on the downside, but he's still efficient in what they're trying to do. But for some reason, they just haven't gotten it together this year. I believe they will. I think eventually, maybe in a year or two, they'll be looking for a new quarterback because you have Jameer Gibbs, and you want to make sure you maximize that, and Amon St. Brown, and these others, and other pieces that they have. So, but getting a little bit off track, offenses that were run um, in the late '90s and early 2000s, Marshall Faulk was the premier running back. From that 1999 period all the way to 2000, about two was his prime years, where he was running for 1,300 yards and getting close to 1,000 yards pretty much every year, which is a scary sight for defenses because he was ahead of his time, and that offense was ahead of his time. The greatest show on turf because everybody tried to push the ball down the field now. But what Dick Vermeil was trying to do and Mike Martz were definitely ahead of his time. And I don't believe Barry Sanders could have played in that offense, but I do think Marshall Faulk could have played in that Detroit's offense. Now, would he been able to stand the rigors of not having a tough or great offensive line? That's yet to be seen. I don't think he would have made it as long as he would have made it. But nevertheless, I think he would have been able to figure it out because they can use him in so many pieces. So that Detroit offense might have looked a little bit different because he was so versatile and he could line up in so many different places that their offense would have spread out. But seeing that everybody knew that they were just going to run the football, made their offense so predictable. But Barry Sanders being able to rush for that many yards, over 15,000 yards in his career, was just a testament to how great he was, especially in an offense that was predicated on just him, running against stacked boxes and things like that. I don't think Marshall could have do that. But I think Marshall just has the edge because of the versatility that he has, um, and everything else that Marshall had. Kind of, it contributed to people saying, not put him in that top running back spot because he's not like an Eric Dickerson or Barry Sanders or Frank Gore or even a Walter Payton. He was, most people seen him as a gadget player, but he was more than that. He was just the running backs, before ahead of his time. Even he was ahead of Roger Craig in some aspects because he had Jerry Rice and, Joe Montana and things like that. But tell me your thoughts of who you think is better between Barry Sanders and Marshall Faulk. Until next time, I'll see you next time.